Okay, good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, great. Thank you, Randy. Thumbs up. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see the presentation? Hopefully.
5 and 9.
Okay, great. All right, so um, bunch of people. George asked, and I guess a bunch of people inquired. We have a lot of new members in the club, and it's been a while since we've done anything about the CMARA PAXTON Repeater. So I put together a little PowerPoint presentation here. I'd like to thank the other trustees as well, Mike, W1BNC, Marty, W1EPH, and Eric, N1VX. A lot of the information that I have in this package came from the other trustees. Okay, the CMARA repeater operates on a frequency of 146.97 with a PL tone of 114.8. The repeater is located on Asinabumpskid Hill, that's a mouthful, in Paxton, Mass. And the hill's about 1,300 and so feet above sea level. Nice high hill. The repeater is an old Motorola Micor, vintage 1980s. The repeater output it's about 40 watts into the cavity filters. The repeater has a 114.8 private line tone that's required in order to open the receiver up. The receiver antenna is up near the top of the tower. You'll see more about that later. And the transmit antenna is about halfway down the tower. And you'll see later on in the presentation why we have separate receive and transmit antennas. So, first of all, if you look back at the history of FM broadcasting uh, when it started out, the hill there, Asinabumpskid Hill, is actually a somewhat famous place. Major Edwin Armstrong, when he first started FM radio, there was a something they put together, a bunch of FM stations that they call the Yankee Network, and there was a station in Meriden, Connecticut, another one on Mount Washington, W1XOJ, and there was also a station. I don't have the call sign, but there was also a station up there on Asinabumpskid Hill, which was part of the Yankee Network. So if you're wondering where Paxton, Massachusetts is at, you see over on the right-hand side of the map here, that's Boston. We have Framingham, and then we have Worcester, and the red balloon there on the map, that's Paxton. So it's basically a little bit northwest of Worcester. So here's an aerial view of the site where the repeater's located up on Asinabumpskid Hill. That red and white tower that kind of looks like an Eiffel Tower, that's the tower that we're on. It's called the Schulan Tower. It's about 230 feet high. And underneath the legs of the tower, there's a white blockhouse. That's where the repeater hardware is located. You'll see more about that. But there's as you'll see in some other pictures, there's a whole bunch of other towers and stations and equipment up there, up on the hill. So this is This is a ground view looking at the front of the building of the tower, and looking up the tower. Like you can see, it's kind of like Eiffel Tower, kind of or construction. And the repeater system is located in the building there. There's a whole bunch of equipment in the building, but one of the other pieces of equipment that's in the building is the backup transmitter, FM transmitter for WAAF. And Eric, N1VX, one of the repeater trustees, is one of the chief engineers for WAAF, or at least he was. I think he might have changed now. But anyways, it's a big part through his graces that we have access to the building and to the tower. Here's another view, sort of looking off to the side. You get a kind of a side view of the tower and the building. There's another newer metal fab kind of building over on the left-hand side there. This is a view of all the stuff that's at the top of the tower, the very top of the tower, and as you can see, there's a plethora of antennas. There's a lot of stuff going on there, and we're fortunate to be able to partake in part of that for our repeater. This is another view. You get a little sort of a side view of the blockhouse, and you see that other building off to the side. And this is a picture just down the road a little bit, the access road that leads into the area where the Shulon Tower is. Now, if you go and stand right underneath the tower next to the building, you see all of the cabling that goes up to all of those antennas that are on the building. In fact, if you look real close, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's actually, like, inside the Eiffel Tower, there's like a Rhone 25 tower that goes up, and they actually use that for supporting all the cables that go up on the inside of the tower. Here's a kind of a view from, I guess, Quabbin Hill Observation Tower of Asnabumskett Hill. In the middle there, you see the Armstrong FM Shulon Tower. AT&T Microwave has a shorter tower over on the right-hand side there. You just see all the microwave dishes on it, and then there's a bunch of other TV and radio stations that are up on the hill as well. Okay, a little bit about the club and the repeater history, and all of this information, by the way, came from, I believe, back in 2016. N1FSK did some great research and did a very nice history on the CMARA club, and as part of that, Sandy had a part on the history of the repeater. And all of that information, by the way, if you're interested, is on the CMARA website, and that's where I got this information. So 2-meter operation sort of started back around the 1950s, I think, with hams, and the 1950 to 1970 time frame. At first, most of the operation was on AM and CW modes. SSB came later on. But around the late 60s and early 70s, started to see some surplus commercial FM equipment sort of make its way into the amateur market. GE, Motorola, there's a bunch of different companies. FM FM started to be used quite widely for the commercial communications market, and a lot of that equipment then made its way over into the amateur ranks. And so the some of the club members started fooling around with putting a repeater together, and a couple of the hams in the club uh, put a repeater together around the 1970 time frame, put it on the air. But at the time, the club was not really interested in taking over the repeater and making it part of the club. So it was up for a while, but then the repeater became silent. But like all things, couple a couple other hams in the club, plus the ones that had originally started it, Franny Moy, W1SPG being one of them, got the repeater back on the air, and they actually had it as a split repeater. The receiver was located Charlie WA1RKRJ's house in North Grafton, and the transmitter was located in North Worcester at Frandy's house. They used a 445 megahertz link between them to link the two pieces of equipment, and then they had some problems along the way, as we still do from time to time. In 1972, I guess a preamp blew out. They finally got it back on the air. And for a while, in 72, I guess the transmitter and the repeater were combined back together and were moved over to Pete, K1HIS's QTH over in Holden. And then in 73, it was relocated to Shrewsbury, where it remained operational for about 9 months. So you see there was different people running it, and it was moving from place to place, and really hadn't firmed up at that time. But they did have a 2-meter machine on the air. Finally, the transmitter was relocated in 1974 to Asnabumskett Hill, but not to the location it's at now. It was located on another very much lower tower, I believe, and the repeater remained with split configuration for quite a while. In 1982, the call sign was changed from WA1KRJ to W1BIM. Jim Carpenter, who was one of the original founding members of the club, I believe at that point the club captured Jim's call sign, W1BIM, as the club call. And in 1984, the CMARA Board of Trustees sort of formed the first repeater trusteeship, and it was decided they would take the machine over. But the machine was aging at that point and definitely needed a facelift. So in 1984, the club purchased, at the time, which was a sort of state-of-the-art machine, a LR1 Micro Specialist made by Kendacom over in Groveland, Mass. In fact, I think I still have that in my base, here in my basement. But anyways, that was used as the repeater for quite a number of years, and finally got in place and on the air in April of 1985. And then 1987, some equipment was purchased. They set up a 400 megahertz link and antennas, and they purchased the Superstation Master antenna, which with hardline feed, which is the transmit antenna that was located in the center of the tower. And then a later milestone occurred finally in 1996. It was decided to relocate the CMARA repeater over on the Shulon Tower in Asnabumskett Hill. And Kurt Jackson, at the time KA1JVC, now W1OBQ, is the site manager. In fact, he lives right there up on Asnabumskett Hill, but he was the site manager for the Shulon Tower. And it was through Kurt's efforts helping the club along with Eric N1VX that we got the repeater system located on the Shulon Tower. The receive antenna was placed up 250 feet almost up on the top of the tower, and the transmitting antenna was placed in the middle of the tower at about 150 feet. And of course, with that change, the results were profound. We have the wonderful coverage that we're used to seeing on the Paxton machine today. The trustees decided to purchase, I believe through Kurt, a Motorola micro repeater system along with some new cavities, filters, and the 4-voice message O controller that was all installed in the 1997 timeframe. The PL tone was changed from 100, which was kind of the standard for 2-meter repeaters, to 114.8 back in 1998. Since then, the repeater has pretty much been maintained. There are 4 CMARA trustees. For many years, it was Marty, W1EPH, Eric N1VX, Bob Archibald, K1SF, and myself. Bob subsequently moved out to Western Mass and was at a point where he really couldn't get into the repeater and was kind of out of his range. So at that point, Bob bowed out of the repeater trustee, and Mike, W1BNC, graciously accepted and volunteered to pick up that 4th repeater trustee slot. And so as of the year 2000 about, the repeater operates from 2 antenna systems. The transmit antenna is about halfway up the tower. The receive antenna is up at the top. As I said, these milestone changes remain mostly in effect today and are the main reason why the W1BIM repeater provides such stellar performance. A lot of people along the way, this is probably just a few, there's probably a lot more that aren't even mentioned here, but along the way there are a lot of people who contributed to making the repeater system what it is today. Okay, enough about the repeater history. Let's move on to a little bit about the repeater hardware. So this is what the repeater looks like. The repeater hardware looks like inside the blockhouse. We're located kind of on a back wall. We're in the same room where the W1AF backup FM transmitter is. We've got our little spot against the back wall there. The small rack with the black front door there, that's the Motorola Micor repeater itself. We then have a 19-inch 6-foot-high rack next to it that contains, on the bottom you see the receive and transmit cavity filters, often referred to as cans. We have a Astron power supply that powers the controller in the repeater cabinet, and also we have a 440 receiver up above there, which is our link control. So we can We can also control the repeater operation using a 440 megahertz link. So that's pretty much all the hardware. Let's take a little closer look at, if you take the front panel off that micro rack, then here's what you see inside there. At the very top is the repeater O controller. That is it's an NHRC2 controller. That little box and stuff was put together through the through the graces of Marty, W1EPH. He put that all together for us and got it wired into the system here. Just below the controller is the RF power amplifier. That's a 100-watt power amplifier. You'll see some more pictures of that. Right below that is the transmitter, the low-power exciter that drives the power amp. And then below that is the receiver chassis. To the right corner of the receiver chassis, there's a little test box that has you can listen to audio, and it has some meter. It has a meter on it that you can do some testing. All of these racks have what they call test jacks. You can plug that little box into the test jack and do some diagnostics if you need to. And then at the very bottom of the rack is the power supply that powers all the micro equipment in the rack. So here's a block diagram of the what the repeater system looks like. So you see the block here is all of the stuff that's in the micro cabinet. You have the exciter or the transmitter that drives the power amp. You have the controller in the middle that controls the transmitter and the receiver below here. You have there's a bandpass filter on the input of the receiver that's tuned for the 2-meter band, just to cut out any extraneous signals going in there. And then you have a part of the controller cabinet is the PL board. That's the board that decodes the 114.8 tone and turns the receiver on. In addition to the hardware that's inside the micro cabinet, on the transmit side, the power amp drives what's called an isolator. You see it here in the little circle. That is a ferromagnetic device that protects the transmitter output. And I'll go into that a little bit more. The output of the isolator and the transmit signal goes into the transmit cavity filters, and those from the output of the filters goes up to the transmit antenna. On the receive side, the receiver antenna signal comes down, goes through the receiver cavity filters, and then into the receiver port. Over on the right-hand side, you see we have a separate antenna, a 440 megahertz antenna for the control link. That goes into the control link receiver, and there's a DTMF touch tone decoder, and we can decode commands that are sent in and send those commands over to the controller module. Here you see a picture of one of our recent trips up to the hill. One of the things we do is often check make sure the transmitter is operating correctly. So you see here we've hooked a bird watt meter in line with a 100-watt slug, and you see it's reading 40 watts output from the up in the very top there. You can just see a little bit. That's the isolator module up there. So the output of the isolator going into the into the repeater cans, basically, the transmit filters. We got about 40 watts out. Here you see a same view, but from a little further back angle, so you can see the isolator modules, that square block that's bolted to the panel. It has an RF load off it, and basically how it works is signal going in into the isolator goes straight through and comes out the other port and goes out to the antenna. Any reflected signal that comes back from the antenna, instead of going back to the transmitter, gets reflected off to this other load. So the transmitter always sees a perfect match, even if there's an SWR issue. So this is a device that kind of protects our transmitter, protects the 100-watt amplifier. We just installed this not too long ago, a few years ago maybe, and we had a temporary one up there that Kurt had loaned to us, but it wasn't really the right frequency band, so it didn't work all that well. But we bought one that's tuned for the right frequency and got it installed. And because a number of years ago we lost the power amp, and we don't know if it was due to we did have SWR problems with the old transmit antenna at one point, and we don't know whether that was the cause of the power amp that we had burning out. But now, no matter what happens, our transmitter is protected. Here you see a picture. We have, since one of our 100-watt amps burned out, I was able to find an additional one. I believe Mike W1BNC has it at his place, because we put it on the bench and tested it out and make sure everything was working. But here you see the backside of the 100-watt amp. And then here's the other side of the 100-watt amp. You see that mic core is built like a tank, and as you can see from the construction of the heat sinks and everything there, the thing it's amazing. It's really built well. It's built like a tank. The whole system operates. There are no cooling fans. Everything is conduction cooled, as you can see by the great heat sinks here. But they really built this stuff to last. This is an NHRC3 controller, Jim N1EKO, and Rick, former club member, now Silent Key. I believe this was his, and Rick was able to get a hold of it and donated it to the club. So when we get at the point where we're going to update to a new repeater system, we'll put this NHR3 controller system in line. It's very similar to the NHRC2 that we have in there now, but this one has some additional features, and it's more up to date. So this will make a nice update when the time comes that we update the other hardware. Thanks to Jim for getting that to the club. The controller basically is the brain of the repeater. When a signal is received by the uplink receiver, and if it has the correct PL tone, the tone decoder opens the receiver. The controller then creates the push-to-talk signal to turn the transmitter on. The controller then sends the receive audio from the receiver to the transmitter, and the transmitter rebroadcasts the received signal on the downlink frequency 146.97, i.e. the repeater repeats the received signal. So there's one thing that makes repeater operation a bit difficult that most of us normal hams at our stations don't have to think about. And that is repeater operation is kind of a unique operation situation. When you operate your station from home, you listen, you receive, and then when it comes time for you to respond to another station, you transmit, but you're doing this at separate times. Well, the repeater, when it operates, is actually receiving and transmitting at the same time. Now think how difficult that would be. Feedback and overload will happen unless special filtering of the transmit and receive paths are included as part of the design. So in order to make that happen, that we can receive and transmit at the same time without the receiver and the transmitter interfering with each other, you need what's called very high Q, very narrow bandpass and notch cavity filters. I showed you those. They sometimes call them cans because they're actually a cavity, and you need these in both the transmit and the receiver feed lines. Separate transmit and receive antennas are also very helpful because the physical separation between the transmit and receive antenna, especially if they're one above each other in a vertical situation, provides additional isolation between the transmit and the receive operation. If you look at electrically what one of those cavity filters looks like, it looks like this circuit that I've shown here, where the bandpass part of the cavity is the parallel LC circuit made up of L1C1 that gives you a bandpass filter, and then the series LC circuit made up of L2C2 gives you the band reject or the notch filter. I think maybe, I don't know, maybe it's been probably a year, maybe a year and a half or so, but one of the visits we made up when we went up to the repeater site, we hadn't looked at the cavities in quite a while, and we thought that, geez, maybe it would be a good idea to take a look at the cavities and make sure that they're tuned properly. There's a big tuning knob. I don't know if you remember seeing that at the top of the cavity, where you move a slug up and down inside the cavity where you can actually tune it. And so we took my vector network analyzer over to the site and hooked it up to the filters and did a sweep. And so what you see here is this is a vector network analyzer sweep of the transmit cavity. Over on the right-hand side, you see the little marker there. That's at 146.97. That's the transmit frequency, and you can see the very top of the graph is zero loss, and then it looks like if you look at the marker here, marker number 1, it's 2.5 dB down. So there's a little bit of loss going through the cavity filter, but you see here's the bandpass characteristics. So you have a bandpass filter at the transmit frequency, but also in line in the transmitter we have a nice notch filter at the receiver frequency. So we're trying to get rid of as much of the transmit signal that's spilling over into the receiver frequency, which is over here at 146.37, and you can see by the markers here that's almost 65 dB down from the transmit level. So that's quite a notch. And the only way you can get that is by using cavity filters. LC type filters, you'd never be able to get that big of a notch, and so that's what makes it all work. And then likewise, if you now go over and look at the cavity filter on the receive side, it's just the inverse of what you saw on the transmit side. Now the bandpass filter is over on the receive frequency. It lets the receive signal go through. And on this one, we're showing about a 1.7 dB loss on the receive side. And once again, at the transmit frequency, we're seeing a notch of about 66 decibels or so. So that's a nice deep notch to keep the any products of the transmitter from getting into the receiver. So having these filters is the only way that the repeater system can transmit and receive at the same site, even though they're on different frequencies, separated by 600 kilohertz. If these filters were not in line, the transmitter would overload the receiver. You wouldn't be able to hear anything. The hill up there on Asnabumsket Hill is a pretty rough spot. In fact, here's an article from a newspaper. It might have been in the Worcester paper back in 1940. This was actually one of the earlier Armstrong towers before they built the Chulon Tower, and I think was the reason they built such a rugged structure. But back around 1940, they had a real bad ice storm, and 100+ mile-an-hour winds go through on the hill, and it took the top 200 feet off the tower that they had there. Ended up in this pile of rubble on the ground. So it's it can be a treacherous treacherous place in the wintertime. Okay, well, that pretty much ends my part of the presentation. I'll be glad to answer any questions, and once again, thanks to Mike, Marty, and Eric for all the material that they provided me to help me put this together. Let me stop sharing, and be glad to answer any questions from the room or from Zoom.
Thank you, Greg. Greg, can you hear me? Nod. Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Greg. Anyone in here have any questions for Greg on the repeater? Gil.
Hey, Greg. Hey,
Hey.
a couple of years back, like, I don't know, maybe 2017, 2018 timeframe, weren't we playing around, you and Mike playing around with like some newer repeater hardware to replace the Micor?
Yeah, yes, we were, and so the club was given, and Mike probably has better memory of this than I do, but the club was given by one of the club members. The club was given two GE repeater systems, older hardware, probably similar vintage to the Micor that we had up there, and we originally started to see about getting those systems operational, and thought about at least maybe having those as a backup. And then it turns out Kurt, the who runs the site there, found out that we had those repeater systems, and he said, "Oh, I have a bunch of customers that still use that hardware, and finding backup hardware for those repeater systems is getting harder and harder to find. How would you guys like to trade those repeater systems for a nice, newer, more modern Motorola repeater system?" And we said, "Yeah, that'd be great." So we did that. We traded the hardware over to Kurt. Kurt provided us with a Motorola repeater, and Jim, N1EKO, and Mike, W1BNC, worked on the Motorola repeater, and we were not able to get it operational. There was something about its programming or something. We just could not get it to work. So we returned that hardware back to Kurt, and although we haven't received it yet, Kurt supposedly has another Motorola system that he can get to us if and when the micro goes down, or if and when we decide we want to swap that hardware out. So we do have a backup, and at some point we will probably do the changeover. But so far, I'm knocking on wood here. The as I always say, the old girl on the hill is still working.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Gil. Anyone else? Questions?
Yeah, I see John, KB1VXY, got a hand up. Go right ahead, John.
Yeah, hi, Greg. My question is about the PL tone. Well, what are the units of the 114.8? Is that that's something on top of the FM signal 146370, and that does something in the repeater to make a tone? It's called a tone, but it's everything's transmitted by radio frequency. So what exactly is it?
Yeah, so it's actually what's called a subaudible tone. So there's actually in your 2-meter rigs, there's a tone board, and you set that up for a certain frequency, so that when you turn your transmitter on, in addition to your voice signal going, it's actually modulating and transmitting that 114.8 tone on the RF carrier along with your voice. And the receiver then at the repeater picks up that tone and says, okay, this is a valid signal coming in. It has the proper tone. I'm going to open the receiver and allow the signal to go through. And it's just a way that they came up with for Motorola coined it originally, I guess, and they called it PL, or private line, because what was happening is if you had two repeaters in the same area that were on the same frequency, right? Then when you tried to key the repeater up, you'd end up keying both of them up. And so by adding this tone, you could have it selective, even though the two repeaters were on the same frequency. You could have a selective by having the right tone. If the two repeaters had a different tone, then you would only activate the one that you wanted to activate.
Okay, good.
Any other questions?
This is KB10QA. I'll make an observation. I actually worked at the Yankee Network for a couple of years from 1959 to 1961. And I got to talk to the engineers there. And I was a producer. And I was an in-studio guy. I was responsible for all the playing of the records, commercials, etc., all disc at that point. But it was interesting to hear some of the older engineers that have been there for a very, very, very long time. And they did remember some of this history. And I did find it quite interesting.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Yeah, that's very interesting. Anything else? Any other questions on Zoom or out in the hall? Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed the presentation and kind of got to see what the repeater hardware looks like.
Thank you, Greg.